In the 1980s, record labels chased trends fast and pushed artists just as quickly. Some were everywhere, then vanished almost overnight. This list looks back at musicians who were hyped, marketed, and promised greatness, but could not survive changing tastes, bad timing, or brutal industry decisions of that era. Kajagoogoo exploded into the 1980s with a look and sound that felt perfectly designed for the new music television era. Their image was striking, their fashion bold, and their debut hit dominated airwaves almost instantly. For a brief moment, it felt like they were unstoppable. But behind the scenes, tension grew fast. The band was marketed heavily around its lead singer, creating imbalance and resentment that quickly boiled over. When that voice left the group, so did the momentum. Audiences moved on just as fast as they arrived. Kajagoogoo became a cautionary tale of how image-driven success could collapse overnight. What once felt futuristic suddenly sounded dated, and the industry stopped calling. They did not fail because of talent, but because timing, ego, and pressure collided at the worst possible moment. Their story set the tone for many artists that followed, especially those who looked polished on the surface but were fragile underneath. And that same fragile success story was about to repeat itself with another band built for instant fame. Animotion is remembered almost entirely for one massive hit that seemed impossible to escape during the mid-1980s. The song was everywhere, and for a moment, it felt like the band would ride that wave straight into lasting success. But when the spotlight dimmed, there was very little left holding them there. Changes in lineup disrupted their identity, and follow-up releases failed to capture the same energy. The industry quickly labeled them as a one-moment act, a reputation that is nearly impossible to escape. Despite having the sound that defined the era, Animotion could not adapt as tastes shifted. They were trapped between synth-driven pop fading out and new styles pushing in. Their failure was quiet, not dramatic, but just as final. Listeners remembered the song, not the band. And as audiences moved on, another group with a catchy name and unforgettable hooks was already walking the same dangerous path. Wang Chung had a name everyone remembered, and songs that became cultural shorthand for the 1980s. Their music appeared everywhere, from radio to movies, making them feel larger than life. But that visibility came at a cost. Their sound became too closely tied to a single moment in time. As trends shifted, Wang Chung struggled to evolve beyond the polished pop that made them famous. New releases failed to land, and the industry quickly lost interest. They were not rejected outright, just quietly sidelined. What once felt energetic and modern suddenly felt frozen in place. Wang Chung did not disappear because they lacked ability, but because the era they represented moved on without them. They became a symbol of how tightly branding could trap an artist. And just as their success faded, another group proved that controversy alone could not guarantee longevity. Frankie Goes to Hollywood arrived with shock, spectacle, and an aggressive marketing push that felt unavoidable. Their debut success was massive, fueled by controversy, censorship, and non-stop promotion. For a moment, it seemed like they were rewriting the rules of pop stardom. But controversy fades faster than music, and when the shock wore off, the cracks showed. Internal conflict, creative struggles, and impossible expectations crushed their momentum. Follow-up releases failed to match the hype, and the band fractured under pressure. What once felt revolutionary quickly felt forced. They burned too bright and too fast. Frankie Goes to Hollywood became proof that noise does not equal staying power, and their rapid collapse made the industry cautious, even as another beloved pop group began to face the same slow decline. The Thompson Twins were everywhere in the 1980s, blending catchy hooks with a polished image that fit perfectly on television. They seemed adaptable, stylish, and reliable, producing hit after hit during their peak. But consistency slowly turned into predictability. As music tastes shifted toward grittier and more experimental sounds, The band struggled to keep relevance. Their image remained frozen while the audience moved forward. Sales declined, radio support faded, and eventually the spotlight disappeared. The Thompson twins did not crash, they faded. Their failure was gradual, almost polite, but no less final. They became another reminder that success built on trends rarely survives their collapse. And just like them, many more artists from the 1980s were still waiting to fall, just as hard. A Flock of Seagulls became an instant visual and sonic symbol of the 1980s. Their image was unforgettable, their sound icy and melodic, and their breakout hit felt like it would last forever. For a brief window, they were everywhere, riding the early wave of music television exposure. But the very elements that made them famous also boxed them in. Their look became a distraction, and their sound was so closely tied to a specific moment that evolution felt impossible. As trends shifted, audiences remembered the hairstyle more than the songs. Internal instability and inconsistent releases made it hard to maintain momentum. They were not short on ambition, but timing turned against them. What once felt futuristic quickly became a caricature of the era. A Flock of Seagulls did not collapse loudly. They simply drifted out of view. And as they faded, another act showed how one global hit could completely overshadow everything else. Baltimora burst onto the scene with a single song that became unavoidable across dance floors and radio stations. The energy was infectious, pure, playful, and perfectly suited to the decade. For a moment it felt like the beginning of something huge, but that moment never expanded. The hit became the identity, leaving no room for growth or reinvention. Follow-up efforts struggled to gain attention, and the industry quickly lost interest. Baltimora became frozen in time, remembered for one sound and nothing beyond it. The problem was not quality, but imbalance. One song carried everything, and when the spotlight moved on, there was nothing left to stand on. Their story became a textbook example of how fast success could vanish. And just like that, another band with a massive hit was about to learn the same painful lesson. Cutting Crew arrived with a song that felt emotional, polished, and perfectly tuned for radio dominance. It played everywhere, connecting instantly with listeners. The band seemed positioned for a long run, but the follow-up never found the same footing. The music industry moved fast, and Cutting Crew could not keep up with changing tastes. Their sound was suddenly labeled safe and predictable. Without strong label support, they faded quietly. Audiences remembered the feeling of the hit, but not the band behind it. Cutting Crew became another act defined by a single moment rather than a catalog. They did not fail from lack of talent, but from being unable to escape their own shadow. As they slipped away, another duo discovered how being too polished could be just as dangerous. Naked Eyes found success by reworking familiar melodies into sleek, synth-driven hits that dominated airwaves. Their sound felt smooth, accessible, and unmistakably tied to the 1980s, but that accessibility became a trap. As audiences grew tired of glossy production, Naked Eyes struggled to redefine themselves. New releases failed to break through, and their identity became locked to earlier success. They were not rejected outright, just slowly ignored. The industry shifted focus, and Naked Eyes were left behind. Their music remained recognizable, but relevance disappeared. They became another example of how quickly pop favor could turn. And as their moment ended, a more experimental act showed that even intelligence and innovation were no guarantee of survival. Scritti Politti were different from many of their peers, blending pop with intellectual ideas and polished production. For a time, that made them stand out. Their sound was sleek, thoughtful, and perfectly aligned with the era. But complexity did not always translate to mass appeal. As trends shifted toward rawer sounds, Scritti Politti felt out of place. Their carefully crafted style suddenly seemed distant, and overly refined. Commercial momentum slowed, and interest faded. They were respected more than remembered. Scritti Politti did not crash or implode, they simply drifted away from the mainstream. Their story proved that even originality could struggle against changing tastes. And with that, the list of 19 80s artists who vanished quietly was far from finished. The Motels built a reputation on atmosphere and emotional intensity, carving out a space that felt darker and more mature than much of the 1980s pop landscape. Their songs captured late-night loneliness and restless driving energy, and for a while, that mood resonated deeply. But the band struggled to maintain momentum as the decade moved forward. Lineup instability and shifting label priorities made it hard to build a consistent identity. As brighter and louder acts took over, the Motels began to feel too subtle for an industry chasing instant hooks. Their music did not age poorly, but it stopped fitting the moment. Radio support faded, tours slowed, and attention moved elsewhere. They did not implode, they simply slipped through the cracks. The Motels became one of those bands people remembered fondly, but rarely revisited. And as their sound dimmed, another group learned how even massive popularity could still vanish quickly. The Outfield enjoyed a level of success most bands would envy, with songs that became staples of radio and sports arenas alike. Their sound was clean, melodic, and instantly recognizable. For a time, it felt like they had unlocked the perfect formula for longevity. But that same polished approach became a limitation. As musical tastes shifted toward rougher edges and new movements, the Outfield struggled to evolve without losing what made them popular. New releases sounded too familiar, and the industry lost interest in maintaining their presence. They were not rejected, just gradually replaced. Fans remembered the hits, but fewer followed what came after. The Outfield became frozen in their peak, unable to escape it. And just as their moment stalled, another artist discovered how early success could become an impossible standard to live up to. Corey Hart burst onto the scene with confidence, style, and a look that defined the era. His early hits were everywhere, and his image felt perfectly suited for music television dominance. For a brief window, he seemed unstoppable. But rapid fame came with intense pressure. Health issues, changing trends, and shifting label focus all collided at once. As newer artists emerged, Corey Hart struggled to regain his footing. Attempts to evolve his sound were met with diminishing returns, and the spotlight moved on. His early success became a shadow he could not outrun. Corey Hart did not lose his talent. He lost timing. The industry that built him so quickly was just as fast to move on, and his story set the stage for one of the most dramatic career collapses of the decade. Billy Squier was positioned as a major rock star, blending arena-ready sound with mainstream appeal. His rise felt solid and earned, built on strong songs and heavy rotation. Then everything changed almost overnight. A single creative decision damaged his image beyond repair, and the backlash was swift and unforgiving. Radio support evaporated, industry confidence collapsed, and his career momentum stopped cold. Billy Squier became a cautionary tale of how fragile success could be in the 1980s. Talent was not enough to survive a public misstep. The industry offered little room for recovery. His fall was shocking, not because it was slow, but because it was immediate. And that sudden collapse echoed through the industry, just as another powerful voice began to fade from view. Laura Branigan possessed one of the most commanding voices of the decade, delivering hits that felt dramatic and unforgettable. Her songs dominated charts and soundtracked countless moments. For a time, it seemed her power alone would guarantee longevity. But as trends shifted, that dramatic style lost favor. The industry moved toward different sounds and support faded. Despite undeniable talent, Laura Branigan struggled to maintain the same level of visibility. Her career slowed quietly, not because audiences rejected her, but because attention drifted elsewhere. She remained respected, but no longer prioritized. Her story became another reminder that even extraordinary ability could not always survive changing tastes. And with her fade from the spotlight, the pattern of 1980s artists disappearing continued. Berlin stood out in the 1980s by leaning into darker moods and electronic tension rather than pure pop gloss. Their sound felt edgy, dramatic, and slightly dangerous, which helped them break through at a time when image mattered as much as music. One massive hit pushed them into the mainstream, but it also redefined them in a way they could never escape. Everything after was compared to that moment. Internal changes and creative shifts made it difficult to build consistency, and the band struggled to balance artistic ambition with commercial expectations. As the decade moved on, Berlin found themselves out of step with both pop and alternative audiences. They were not forgotten because they lacked depth, but because their identity became too narrowly defined. What once felt bold slowly felt locked in place, and as Berlin slipped from relevance, another group learned how novelty could become a trap almost overnight. Men Without Hats became globally known for a song that turned playful quirk into instant recognition. The track was catchy, humorous, and unavoidable, turning the band into a cultural reference point rather than a developing act. But novelty success comes with a cost. Audiences embraced the joke, but did not wait around for what came next. Follow-up releases struggled to be taken seriously, and the band was quickly labeled as a one-moment act. The industry moved on, leaving little room for reinvention. Men Without Hats became remembered for a single idea instead of a body of work. Their talent was overshadowed by the weight of one song. As their presence faded, another band showed how subtlety and consistency could still struggle to survive in a fast-moving decade. The Fix built a loyal following with a sound that was thoughtful, layered, and emotionally restrained. Their music carried depth and atmosphere, standing apart from louder pop acts. For a time, they enjoyed steady success, with songs that resonated strongly on radio. But as trends shifted, subtlety became a disadvantage. Louder and more visually driven acts dominated attention, and the Fix found themselves pushed aside. Their sound did not age poorly, but it stopped aligning with what the industry wanted to promote. Momentum slowed, and visibility dropped. They became respected rather than celebrated. The Fix did not fail loudly, they faded quietly, leaving behind songs that still feel relevant but are rarely discussed. And as their presence dimmed, another artist learned how fast fame could evaporate after a single defining moment. Tony Basil achieved one of the most recognizable pop culture moments of the 1980s with a song that blended cheer, attitude, and mass appeal. It dominated airwaves and visuals alike, making her instantly famous. But the success was so overwhelming that it erased everything else. Tony Basil became inseparable from that one hit. Attempts to move forward never escaped its shadow. The industry had little interest in developing her beyond that moment, and public attention faded quickly. Her career became defined by a single snapshot in time. She did not lose relevance slowly. She was frozen there, and that kind of instant but limiting fame echoed strongly in the story of another international artist whose success crossed borders, but not decades. Nena exploded into global consciousness with a song that captured youthful energy and Cold War tension in equal measure. It became an anthem, breaking language barriers and dominating charts. For a brief moment, it seemed like the beginning of a long international career. But sustaining that success outside her home market proved difficult. Follow-up releases struggled to connect with the same audience, and the global spotlight moved on. Nena remained successful in parts of Europe, but in the wider mainstream she became tied to one defining hit. The world remembered the song, not the artist's evolution. Her story became another example of how global fame could be both powerful and fleeting. And with that, the list of 1980s artists who burned brightly and faded continued to grow. Falco rose to international fame with a sound and persona that felt sharp, rebellious, and unmistakably different from anything else on American radio. His success proved that language barriers could be broken when attitude and timing aligned perfectly. For a moment, Falco felt unstoppable, blending confidence, controversy, and catchy hooks into a global presence. But that same intensity became difficult to sustain. As trends shifted, his confrontational style lost momentum with mainstream audiences. Attempts to recapture the magic struggled against changing tastes and industry expectations. Falco remained respected, but the spotlight moved elsewhere. His story became one of brief domination, followed by quiet retreat. He did not lack originality, but the moment that lifted him was too specific to repeat. What once felt daring eventually felt distant, and just as Falco's edge dulled in the public eye, another artist discovered how image alone could not guarantee survival. Dead or Alive stormed into the 1980s with bold visuals, relentless energy, and a sound that demanded attention. Their breakout success was explosive, fueled by dance floors and non-stop rotation. The band felt larger than life, perfectly designed for the era. But image-driven fame can be fragile. As the novelty faded, the music struggled to evolve beyond its initial impact. Internal changes and industry pressure made it difficult to maintain momentum. Audiences moved on, chasing new sounds, while Dead or Alive became tied to a single defining moment. The band did not disappear instantly, but relevance slipped away quickly. Their legacy became fixed in one era and one sound, and that pattern repeated itself as another polished voice learned how easily attention could drift. Paul Young built his success on smooth delivery and emotional restraint, becoming a familiar presence on radio during the heart of the decade. His voice felt comforting and reliable, and his songs resonated with a wide audience. For a time, he seemed positioned for longevity, but reliability turned into predictability. As music trends shifted towards stronger visuals and sharper edges, Paul Young struggled to stand out. New releases failed to make the same impact, and industry support softened. He remained respected, but excitement faded. His career slowed quietly, without scandal or collapse. Paul Young became another artist remembered more for a moment than a movement. And as his gentle sound drifted from focus, a technically brilliant band faced a different kind of challenge. Level 42 earned admiration for musicianship and complexity, blending jazz-influenced skill with pop accessibility. Their talent was undeniable, and their success felt earned rather than manufactured. But technical brilliance does not always translate into lasting mass appeal. As the decade moved on, their sound became harder to place within shifting trends. Audiences gravitated toward simpler hooks and stronger visuals. Level 42 struggled to adapt without losing their identity. Popularity declined, even as respect remained. They became known as musicians rather than chart leaders. Their fade was gradual, not dramatic, and their story set the stage for another group who briefly captured everything, then lost it just as fast. The Escape Club burst into prominence with a song that felt urgent, political, and perfectly timed. It captured attention immediately and dominated airwaves for a brief but intense period. The success felt massive, but it was narrowly focused. Follow-up releases failed to carry the same weight, and the band struggled to redefine themselves beyond that single statement. The industry moved on quickly, leaving little room for recovery. The Escape Club became locked to one moment, unable to expand their identity. Their rise and fall showed how quickly the 1980s rewarded and abandoned artists, and with their disappearance, the pattern of forgotten stars continued without mercy. Big Country arrived with a sound that felt vast and dramatic, instantly setting them apart from everything else on the radio. Their use of guitar tones that echoed traditional folk instruments gave their music a sense of identity few bands could match. Early success made them feel important, almost timeless. But that distinctiveness also became a limitation. As trends shifted, their sound was increasingly seen as tied to a specific mood and moment. Attempts to evolve never fully landed with mainstream audiences. The industry began to favor styles that felt smaller, sharper, and more disposable. Big Country did not lose credibility, but they lost momentum. Their presence slowly faded as attention moved elsewhere. What once felt bold became niche. They remained respected by fans, but largely ignored by the broader market. Their story showed how uniqueness alone could not guarantee survival. And as their wide-open sound narrowed in public memory, another electronic-driven act faced an even faster disappearance. Information Society felt perfectly engineered for the late 1980s, blending sleek electronics with futuristic themes that fit the moment exactly. Their breakthrough success suggested they were about to ride the next wave of pop evolution. For a brief time, they were positioned as leaders rather than followers. But technology-driven trends move quickly, and their sound aged faster than expected. Follow-up material struggled to stand out as electronic music became more crowded. What once felt cutting-edge suddenly felt crowded and replaceable. Industry attention drifted, and the band struggled to maintain visibility. Information Society did not collapse under pressure. They were simply overtaken by the pace of change. Their story became a reminder that being ahead of the curve could still leave you behind. And just as their futuristic promise faded, another artist discovered how image could briefly overpower longevity. Stacey Q became instantly recognizable through dance-driven hits that dominated clubs and radio alike. Her sound was playful, confident, and perfectly suited to the era. For a moment, it felt like she embodied the spirit of pop fun. But the image was too tightly tied to a single style. As trends shifted, that playful identity lost traction. Attempts to mature her sound failed to capture the same attention. The industry quickly moved on, chasing new faces and fresher looks. Stacey Q became associated with a single phase of pop culture rather than an evolving career. Her disappearance was swift and quiet. She did not fail from lack of charisma, but from being locked into a moment that passed too quickly. And that same trap awaited another group whose early success felt just as promising. Quarterflash entered the decade with a sound that blended rock, pop, and jazz influences, creating something smoother and more adult than much of what surrounded them. Early success suggested they could bridge multiple audiences at once, but that balance proved difficult to maintain. As radio formats tightened and tastes polarized, Quarterflash struggled to fit neatly anywhere. Their music was respected, but not aggressively promoted. Momentum slowed, and visibility dropped. They did not implode or change drastically. They simply stopped being prioritized. Quarterflash became one of those bands people remembered liking but rarely sought out. Their story reflected how easily artists could slip through the cracks during a crowded decade. And as their presence faded, another group learned how one perfect song could become both a gift and a curse. When in Rome captured lightning in a bottle with a song that felt romantic, dramatic, and perfectly timed. It dominated airwaves and became instantly memorable. For a moment, it felt like the start of something lasting, but the success was too concentrated. Everything became defined by that single track. Follow-up releases struggled to escape its shadow, and industry interest evaporated quickly. When in Rome became frozen in that moment, remembered more as a feeling than a band. Their disappearance was not dramatic, just inevitable. They became one of the clearest examples of how quickly the 1980s could elevate and abandon artists. And with their fade, the list of forgotten names quietly reached its end. If any of these artists surprised you or brought back a forgotten memory, let us know which one vanished too soon in the comments below. Tap like if this era still lives in your head, and subscribe so we can keep revisiting the music that once felt unstoppable but quietly slipped away.